Most construction company owners don't start their business with the end in mind, thinking about how they're going to transition out of the company. Brad DesJardin did. He and his partner Neil started DesCor Builders with a mission, a set of values, and a clear plan, not just to grow a successful company and make a bunch of money, but to eventually hand it off the right way. Over 20 years, starting with their first $4,000 project, they've built nearly $2 billion worth of work and have earned a reputation as one of the best places to work in Northern California. And most importantly, they've developed a leadership team that could run the business without them. In today's episode, Brad breaks down exactly how they did it. We talk about what makes people worth promoting, how to evaluate risk as you get older, and why stepping away doesn't mean losing your identity if you've done the hard work right. If you're serious about building a company that can thrive without you, pay attention. This isn't theory, it's what actually works. Here's my conversation with Brad DesJardin. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Brad, welcome to Construction Genius.
Good morning.
What was the hardest emotional challenge you faced after you stepped away from your business? Was it the fear of becoming irrelevant, the loss of control, or something else?
I would say that I guess the biggest challenge I had was just missing being with the people that I loved and admired every day, and just feeling kind of left out. We had such a good time at DesCor that I felt that it was missing the people. I never felt like loss of control or a sense of identity, because I get my identity not in what I do, but whose I am. So
that's interesting. Missing the people. What about the people did you miss the most?
I miss the camaraderie. Neil and I surrounded ourselves with highly talented, highly committed, highly passionate people, and it energized me.
So give us just a little bit of background, maybe the 50,000-foot view. You mentioned your business partner, Neil, about your career in construction and how you've reached this point in your career.
As far as my career in a nutshell?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a third generation contractor. My grandfather and father were both contractors. I got into the business in the early 80s. I worked for a large company in the Bay Area, moved to Sacramento, and I was able to be with a company that was starting up that has since now become a huge construction company. From there, I met my business partner, Neil Cordero, about 29 years ago, and we worked together for 8 years at a previous company, DPR Construction, and we decided that there was an opportunity to create something really special in the construction industry in Sacramento. So 20 years ago, we broke out with a mission, a purpose, and a set of values, and that was pretty much it. Our first job was $4,000, and over the tenure, Neil and I did about $1.9 billion worth of work. We've been recognized as a great place to work in the Sacramento area for the last 18 years, in addition to other awards. But we were able to really attract people that shared our values, and to be able to be around people that share your values and that operate on such a high level, it was just an absolute pleasure. When we were talking about letting go, and I see my life is a series of assignments. And I feel that, I had assignments earlier in my career at previous employers. And I feel that this last assignment for 18 years at DesCor Builders was absolutely my most fulfilling assignment. And now I'm realizing my purpose in my current assignment.
Why do you see your life as a series of assignments?
Because I think missions, whether it's company missions or life missions, I think missions have an expiration date, and it gives you a sense of finality and accomplishment. I felt that at DesCor Builders, that assignment was to create a business that represented both Neil and my shared values. And I felt that there's a certain seasons of life. And what happens is I think we operate at a high level when we're in the right season of life. And I felt that, Neil and I had my assignment with DesCor Builders, Neil and I, we always worked for the company. I mean, the company was before our personal, we felt that if we took care of the company, we would be taken care of personally. So that was secondary to us. So what happened is it came a time where I felt what was best for the company is that the people leading the company were stepping into the prime of their career instead of stepping out of the prime of their career.
Interesting.
And as far as in, the day-to-day battles of the construction issues, just felt that the energy of young people that were passionate and energetic, it just served the company better to have me be in a different role. I'm still at the company very part-time as an advisor.
Let me ask you something here. One of the deepest struggles that most construction companies have is attracting and retaining the right people. What do you think is the connection between you and Neil being clear on your values and your ability to therefore attract and retain the right people?
Well, our purpose is to build a lasting legacy of great buildings and even greater relationships. Well, the key to relationships are similar values, a long-term relationship. And that's really seeing the world through a similar lens, not the exact lens. And we felt that we could tell if people were going to thrive at DesCor by how they embraced our values. People actually came to us because they were attracted by it. And I think that values kept them there. We were able to retain great people because we lived those values daily. Also, people want a sense of purpose, and they wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. And we feel that we afforded them that opportunity.
So it's interesting. You made that connection between not only understanding what your values are, but living them out. And from if I heard you right, then if you're doing those two things where you have clarity and you have integrity, that is attractive to people who share those values and want to live them out as well.
Absolutely. And one of very strongest values is accountability. And every time what we would do is we would explain the culture to every person that came in the door, every new hire in the onboarding process. And we would give them, Neil would call a second title. It was, they were the director of corporate values. And if they saw us not living those values, that they had the open platform to call us out on it.
Can you give me an example of someone calling you out on you specifically not upholding the values?
You know what? I can tell you that I don't recall a time that didn't happen.
Okay, so no one ever called you out yourself saying, hey, Brad, you say this, but you're doing this.
Right.
Interesting. Excellent. Tell me why accountability is important and what you mean by accountability.
We describe accountability as we do what we say. And what I've learned in, 40 plus year career in construction is that could be a competitive advantage to do what you say. A lot of people tell you what you want to hear, but to be able to tell the truth, we always say, if Neil and I would tell people that if you tell the truth, you can't go wrong.
Right. Can you think of a time where that value of accountability, of doing what you say, cost you something, and it was that cost, as you were reflecting prior to making the decision, caused you discomfort, and you had to push through that discomfort in order to maintain that value?
I would say that early on, holding people accountable, we used to say that we had a disciplined approach. So internally, how it would work is that I'd say I would hire disciplined people so I didn't have to discipline them. But with accountability, say we do what we say. Early in our tenure, we were brand new, and we had priced this project. And what happened was we met the owner's budget. We were going to do this project, and the subcontractor who was second bidder came back to us and said, hey, we could change our price. And it would have been very beneficial for DesCor to do that but we had already told a previous subcontractor that we were going to use them. And this was very early where every dollar meant something to us. So, we stuck by our guns. We met our commitment to the previous contractor, and we did not see any fee increase.
So keep going. Yeah, please.
Times is when we've had to accountability with our values. We had to, not only would we hold ourselves accountable, but sometimes we would have to hold other members on the team accountable and have uncomfortable discussions about that.
Yeah. Going back to the start of your business, you worked for DPR for a number of years, and then you and Neil went out and started your own company. I love that story of going from a $4,000 project to building almost $2 billion worth of work over the lifetime of your involvement in the company. When you started the business, there's that phrase, start with the end in mind. Did you and Neil sit down and say, we're going to be in this for this season of our life, however that long that season is, and then at the end of that time, we're going to pass it on to another group of people? Or was that something that evolved over time?
No, that was something that again, starting with the end in mind. In fact, Neil and I had discussions prior to starting DesCor Builders that we kind of discussed, well, what is it going to look like in our last days of the company? We also created an avenue. We started discussing our transition. We initially discussed it with a group of people in 2008, 3 years after we started the company. We started selling the company or at least portion of the company in 2010. So it has always been in the dialogue of DesCor Builders, and that we felt that about this time, we used, in fact, in our operating agreement, we have a kind of a date where the company decides whether or not we can go further, an age. So we actually held ourselves accountable to an age where we would start thinking about it.
What do you mean by an age?
Yeah, like in our operating agreement we had where starting at 60 years old, you would start to sell your remaining shares in the business until you're 65.
Okay, so in other words, you're going to be done with the business by 65.
Yes.
Interesting. And why did you?
But that's only based upon whether or not, like, I'm currently under contract where it's up to the leaders whether or not or mutual agreement that if I extend my interaction with the company.
Okay, so it's not set in stone, but
it is not set in stone.
Okay. Now, we started talking a few minutes ago about this idea of seasons. And so that's an interesting way of framing life. And then you mentioned specifically this idea of the energy to work in construction lends itself to folks who are perhaps a little bit younger in terms of going through the conflicts and the challenges and the intensity, so to speak. How did you come to understand that the season of you leading the company along with Neil was coming to an end? What process did that take for you?
Yeah, I would say part of that was the way you visualize opportunities. When you're younger, you don't foresee any of the either pitfalls or challenges of a potential opportunity. And you just become, as you get older, I think that you become just much more aware of the risk and the risk tolerance.
Right. And so what does that have to do with the season and you deciding to step out of the business?
Well, what that has to do with it is I would not want to be an obstacle if the younger group is willing to take risk. I do not want to be an obstacle to that opportunity.
Okay, I get that. So what you're saying, in other words, is younger folks, they have a longer time frame. They're looking at issues of wealth and things like that in a slightly different way than you are. And so therefore, that would affect the way they look at making decisions.
Yes.
That's really interesting, right? So put us in the room with yourself, Neil, some of the younger generation that you've passed on the business to, as they're perhaps pushing and you're perhaps saying, hold on a second, how did you negotiate and go through that process of risk evaluation and decision-making as you were going through your tenure in leadership in the company?
What we would do is we would meet as a group and just discuss. In fact, we actually created a risk calculator. So the person who would bring the opportunity would develop a risk calculator. Then we would talk about what are the opportunities and the risks. And I saw myself discussing or thinking a lot about what is this going to do? What negative impact would this have to morale or our people and those type of things. So, and I just did not want to be, if young people were willing to take the risk, I was all for it. However, there were times where I just feel that I did not want to be an obstacle to that.
Yep. Yep. What do you think is one element of risk that is most often overlooked by construction companies?
I think it would be the project might look great, but what does it do to the quality of life for the project team? I would say.
Okay. So you got
and the other thing is also, and really the owners determine that quality of life for the project team. They create the environment of fairness and trust. And I was really, we spent a lot of time becoming a resource, and we're in a very commoditized industry.
Yeah.
And I was very aware of whether the potential client looked at us as more of a resource and partner or a commodity.
That's interesting. I like the way you put that the owners create the quality of life for the project team. That's a neat way of putting that. Let me ask you this about your identity and letting go. You said earlier as we kicked off that the biggest challenge for you was missing the people and the camaraderie. What do you think is the source of camaraderie in healthy construction companies?
I'll tell you what helps is winning.
Right? Winning is always better than losing.
No, and I really think that the source of camaraderie started with shared values, kind of a similar lens. We have a bunch of different personalities, but people kind of going in the same direction. And I think the sense of we created a culture that really honored people and really celebrated others' success. So I think people at DesCor really like each other. Like when we have company events, when we have Christmas parties, people hang out way after the event, and there's really a family feel. And I think people are genuinely happy for other people when they succeed, and they're willing to walk with them when they're struggling.
That's interesting. So that second part there, walk with them when they're struggling. How did you navigate decisions in terms of making a move when someone is no longer a fit in the company? Because we all understand that we go through struggles in life, and sometimes they can be quite deep. They can be personal. They can be business related. But how did you go through the process of saying, you know what, you're no longer a fit for our company, and we're going to have to part ways?
Yeah, well, that's always a difficult thing to do. And what we did is, and it always comes down to whether or not they're a value fit. Because if it's a performance issue, then they're not meeting the value of excellence. Okay. So what we felt, the thing that gave us strength to do that is we felt that it was for the good of the company and it was for the good of the other performers, because usually we would always give people a chance. We would always self-evaluate. Is it something that we are doing? And so what we would do is we would go through a process. Have we done everything we can? And are we clear in our expectations? And if they still cannot meet that, it's for the good of the company, the good of the good performers. We always felt that every time that we let a person go, the company got better.
Hey, how's your time management going at the moment? You feel yourself stressed out, overwhelmed by chaos, unable to focus on your critical tasks? Let me tell you about my course, The Shift. In Module 1, you'll learn to control your calendar, not your time, reduce your stress, embrace chaos, and accomplish your critical tasks. And that's just one of the 5 modules in my course. It is a comprehensive online leadership training course for construction companies built by a construction expert. You're going to learn how to communicate effectively with the people that you lead, build and lead a high-performing team, lead your team to agreement on problem resolution in less than an hour, and you're going to get a broad perspective on your career, your leadership, and the things that you must accomplish in order to be successful. And it's all in one course that's completely online, that's completely self-paced, and is 100% money back guaranteed. You take the course, you complete it, you think that was a waste of my time and money, send me an email and I will refund 100% of your money with no questions asked. So go out to theshift.constructiongenius.com and check out everything about the course, and then sign up for yourself and every leader in your company. I promise you, you will not regret it. Now back to the interview. So let me ask you this. As you were developing the company and growing it with the end in mind of eventually exiting it, how did you go through the process of identifying people who would begin to fill those senior roles? How did you test them out for those roles? Were you always thinking we're going to do this internally, or were you also thinking we might bring in talent from the outside? Tell us a little bit about that process.
We felt that we could develop our people internally. And we were looking, and I think you and I have spoken about this before. We were always looking, and we had started in the interview process. I would always, when I'd interview somebody, I would say, could this person take my job?
Yes.
And if they could take my job, I'd hire them. And so we were looking for several traits. And I love how DesCor has actually even expanded on these traits. But the first one is they have got to be a good technician. They have to be good at the job that we've hired them for, whether that was manager, superintendent, estimator, and project engineer. And then from there, we have a saying that, do they think like an owner? And it's not what it's in it. For me, it's more like they didn't care about how they were personally going to be taken care of. They knew they were going to be taken care of. So the first one was they're good at their job. The second one was that we would allow them to lead an initiative. Do they make us better above their job? Is there an initiative for a new software that they're going to try out, or some type of surveying equipment or whatever? And are they leading that effort? Are they interested in not only making themselves better, but making the company better? And the third one is to create a customer base on their own customer base.
That's interesting. So that idea of taking an initiative is thinking like an owner. Is that what you were saying? Taking on an initiative?
And since then, we've kind of expanded that to, and obvious, this was kind of an unsaid rule, is do they represent our values? Are they champions of our values? And the third one is, how do they operate under pressure? Or the fifth one is, how do they operate under pressure?
Yeah. Interesting.
So then we would take those people and we would develop them. We, again, give them initiatives to lead. And so people would see them lead, and they would be a good example for others.
So that's interesting. So I got they have to have a technical skill, or they have to be a good technician. They have to think like an owner, and that's demonstrated in taking on initiatives to make the company better. They have to be able to create a customer base, to be a champion of your values, and then to operate well under pressure.
Yes.
Tell me more about that operating well under pressure. Construction, you get this whole spectrum, right? You get the spectrum of the yeller and the screamer. And we know companies we know billion-dollar companies perhaps that have been built by the yellers and the screamers. And then we also know billion-dollar companies that have been built by people who take a different approach.
Yes.
When you were under pressure, what approach did you take to control yourself?
What I did when I was under pressure is I did not let them see that it was bothering me probably as much as it was. And so, Neil and I, that's where the strength of our partnership, we were able to really kind of bounce things off and keep the pressure within the founder's spectrum.
Okay, so hold on a second then. So having a partner then was helpful because you could talk with him about the issues, and that helped you to control yourself within the issue?
Yes, absolutely.
And so while you were in a meeting, I'm going to ask a very sort of micro granular question. You're in a meeting, an owner, a sub, a supplier is confronting you about something. They're wrong. How did you go about controlling yourself in the midst of that?
Well, I would acknowledge their point, and then I would, that type of stuff didn't bother me because the facts were on our side. So again, what we would do is we would coach our people, don't be stressed for the things you can't control. Okay. So, and that helped as well, but it is help. And, the current officers do the same thing. They bounce it. I mean, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do that role without a partnership or somebody to walk it with you.
So tell us about that, right? Because if you going into business in a partnership, that's a tremendous commitment. Why did you choose to do a partnership as opposed to just starting your own gig?
Oh, partnership with Neil?
Yeah.
Because I had learned the value of partnership in my tenure with DPR. And in fact, Neil and I, we were able to really develop our relationship at partnership. And we knew that it was a winning formula because it's not about me. It's not about Neil. It's more about somebody who it's fun to share successes, and it's essential to share challenges with somebody.
Do you think that's just a reflection of your personality, or is that a human thing that if we embraced it, if more people embraced it, they would have a better time in life?
I think if more people embraced it, they would have a better time in life.
Interesting. Because I know,
and the key to a good partnership is that I was fortunate to have Neil's wife was a fantastic partner. And, what happens is when we were developing our successors, we actually did a lot of training and talking about how their wives need to operate in that role as well.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is that as you were looking at your successors, people who would come in, you were not only considering their performance at work, but you were considering the nature of their relationships outside of work. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more about that. That's interesting.
Okay. Well, we feel that it's very important for, the success of a lot of the success at DesCor is how Neil and I modeled a partnership, and that, we had each other's back, but our wives did too. And I've just seen in the past where a partner's wife can create an issue with the business, second guessing the partner, not trusting the partner. And I can tell you that I was very blessed to have Neil's wife, Heidi, as a partner of mine.
Interesting. So that's interesting to consider when you're, as you're going through the transition. And I think this is probably something that either people don't want to talk about because mixing business and personal, or don't think about talking about that. If I'm considering someone for a senior role or an ownership role, I should consider how they run their personal life, if they're married, how that marriage is going, and how that reflects on their ability to partner in the business.
Absolutely.
It's interesting.
Yeah. We feel that, people have asked us what is the key to our success? And you asked previously, retaining employees. And one of the issues is that businesses in general fail to realize who their most important customers are. And their most important customers are the spouses and families of their employees.
Okay. Dive into that. Tell us more about that.
And what you get with that is that they leave an environment of love and support. And then they come to work with us 8 to 10 hours a day.
Yep.
And the way they are returned back to their loved ones is the way their loved ones are going to feel about the company. They will in turn support their loved ones' efforts when they come back to work. So it's a circle, right? And we feel that not only were we building greater relationships, those greater relationships include strengthening families.
So I think you eloquently stated that. Where does this perspective come from for you? How did you develop this perspective and this approach?
I developed this perspective I just think that you had mentioned, business and personal life. I think that they're much more closely aligned. I don't think that, and maybe in the past, there used to be, you separate your business from your personal life, but I think you're the same person. I learned through my career that I'm the same person at home as I was at work.
Yes.
And I think first of all, it's a lot less tiring. You're not acting at work.
Yes.
And I just think that family support allows people to work at a higher operating level.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting.
And here's an example. Years ago, we had, and understand construction is we're a deadline business.
Yep.
So and Neil and I were focused on creating a quality of life, right?
Right.
Work-life balance, in my opinion, is a misnomer. I think it should be considered more of a sustainable quality of life. So you can't grind people. You can't have people work many, many hours without having them get rest. It's just not good for them. It's not good for their personal life. And several years ago, I went out to a job site. We were on a deadline, and we had a foreman on the site that he had worked 3 weekends in a row. And we had always made accommodations after. We took care of them in some way. And I was out at the job, told him I appreciated his work and that, that we were meeting our objectives on site. And I asked him, how does your wife feel about this? And he goes, she's okay with it. She loves this place. She would be angry with me if I didn't do it. I think that's powerful.
It's interesting, huh? I think it's interesting when you think about the decisions that you've made. How confident are you in your next generation making similar decisions? And how necessary is it that they continue on your values in order for you to feel like the project that you've built has been worthwhile?
Oh, you know what? Every time I walk into the office, Eric, I experience that. They live our values. And to me, one of the biggest blessings of my life is, and any guidance I could give anybody, any recommendations, is focus on enjoying your legacy. I enjoy seeing what they're doing. And an example, I went to a company meeting a couple weeks ago, and they have now instituted or implemented what they call the PACE shout-outs, where they just shout people out at a company meeting for how they represented our values. And so they live the values, and I hope is that they succeed. They have a business that we were at a starting point, $4,000 job, and we took it from nothing. See, they have a lot of momentum, and Neil and my expectation is they're going to thrive much more than we did. But it really does my heart well when I go in there and just see them living the values, living the mission, already identifying their successors and developing them.
So that's an interesting thing also is you guys started with nothing and built something. They've been given something, and the expectation is that they will continue on and make it even better. But how do they stay sharp so that what's been given to them doesn't deteriorate because they haven't necessarily started at the bottom and gone through the grind of building this thing?
I would say that they were with us. They've been with us from the beginning, pretty much. And so they saw the grind.
I see.
They were willing to, and one of the reasons that makes them such great leaders is they really showed their true colors during the subprime mortgage meltdown.
Yes.
And the leaders really emerge and when you go through crisis or real challenge. And it was very impressive the way that they navigated that.
Yes.
And,
that's interesting.
We've been, during COVID, we created a COVID task force that they really ran where, we were identifying the challenges of COVID. They broke up the activities. And so they've been able to see the success. They also they've been the benefactors of seeing just the joy of a strong and loving culture. I mean, I would think that it's ingrained in them. They are going to take it to the next level. And I would say that they know better, and the people who work for them now would hold them accountable. So
it's interesting. How did stepping away from the business affect your sense of identity?
Like I said before, my identity is not in what I do, it's whose I am. And so
what do you mean by whose I am? You said who's, not who I am.
Yeah, it's whose I am.
Tell me what you mean by that.
I'm a follower of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
And my purpose is to please God in what I do. So what I've done, I'm taking the skills and gifts I've been given, and I'm just taking them to new adventures. So
with that foundation, so it's interesting, right? Because our sense of identity grounds us and influences us for better or for worse through our circumstances in life. Was there ever a moment when you were stepping away that you kind of felt like you lost a part of yourself?
No, I was more concerned that people would think that I lost a part of myself. People were looking at me they were like, is he really going to do it? Is he really going to? I mean, because I absolutely loved what I did day to day. I mean, I loved it, and I loved the people more. So like what I said before, I miss them more than the day-to-day work. And it is very, very rewarding for me to help others succeed in all, in everything I do. I get to help DesCor succeed with advice when they need it from me. I get to help young business leaders. I teach classes in business leadership at church, how you can kind of walk your faith at work. I help our church with capital planning. I'm in a group that what we do is we help nonprofits strategize on a high level and help expand their influence. And I get to take my grandchildren to school, which is helping my son and his wife so they can get to work earlier, or they can, they get a date night once a week, and it gives them an opportunity to recharge their marriage. So I feel like the effort that I use to day-to-day running a construction company, and really towards the end, I was helping people. Well, I would say towards my entire career, helping people get to where they wanted to in their career.
Yeah. How did you balance, we're in business obviously to have an impact, but, we have to provide for ourselves and for those who we're responsible for. How did you balance the desire to maximize your financial return with the goal of benefiting others, preserving the legacy of the company, the future of the company?
Yeah, I would say I think that Neil and I did a great job. I got to give kudos to Neil. He created this real clear financial plan that really helped us navigate this. And yeah, could I have maximized profits or more personal wealth? That wasn't really what was driving me. I felt like I was well compensated. I'm well taken care of. And I think I've learned this through my career too, that I don't need to maximize every transaction. If I get a good deal, I'm happy with it.
It's interesting. How long did it take you to come to that point of view, or is that a point of view you've always had?
I would say that it came pretty much, I would say, through my tenure, probably early in my tenure at DesCor. And Neil's the same way. We always had not that we didn't make the best of our opportunities,
sure,
and not that we didn't provide our shareholders spectacular returns, but it was, again, it's more about a quality of life, and tend to focus on, somebody said this once and I've kind of owned it, is your quality of life is really a direct reflection of the quality of relationships. So
yeah,
no matter it, there could always be more money, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but that isn't really what's important. The quality of your relationships are important no matter where you stand on the financial spectrum.
What advice would you give someone who is about to exit their business and unsure of what comes next?
What I did was embrace the uncertainty for a little bit. I literally, from my going away party at DesCor, I was literally driving and I had somebody contact me to become a board member of a nonprofit. And I was like, why would I step into, into some other commitment right now? So I had several groups reach out to me, and I gave myself a year where I just, I was uncertain. And the other thing I did was, you've got to trust. Well, first of all, it was never about Brad. It was never about Neil. It was always about DesCor. And so if you're not entirely focused on yourself all the time, I think joy in that. And but I would say, if you trust the people that you've turned the company over to, enjoy it, enjoy their success, understand, you're part of that, you created that environment, that there's a lot of satisfaction in that.
Quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. I tell you, man, you got to buy this book because it's all about effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS. Leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. I'm an expert working with construction companies, over 2 decades of experience. You're an expert at building projects, but your expertise as far as leadership, sales, marketing, and strategy may need some tuning up, and that's what this book is all about. So go to Amazon and buy yourself a copy. Buy a copy for everyone in your company. And if you buy 10 or more copies, send me an email. and we will set up a free 1-hour question and answer session about the book. And I'll do some bonus training. I would normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. I'm going to do it for you at no charge, just for purchasing 10 copies of Construction Genius. And you can get that on Amazon for under $200. That's what you call a killer deal. All right, back to my interview. Can you remember a time as you were going through the transition while you were still in the business where I just have this image of, our hands being on the business and we're making decisions. Can you remember a time when you began to loosen that hold and you really saw the next generation stepping in and you were okay with that?
Yes. In fact, what we did was, you start with them leading initiatives, then you start with, and I think as business owners, you're on the spectrum of weaning your customers and your customer base away from needing you.
Yes. Yes.
And I would say that what we did and what made our transition, and Neil just retired 2 months ago. And so I can say and that was really the end of our founder's assignment. And I can tell you that
it's like when the elves were getting on the boats at the end of the Lord of the Rings kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what happened is actually 2 years ago, it was in the middle of COVID, or 4 years ago now, 2 years before I transitioned out. What we did is we got the leadership group together, and during COVID, you couldn't really meet. So we met out at a community building that we had built. It was a park. So we met out in a park. And what we did was we had everybody who was stepping into their next role get up to the entire company and give their vision for the company from their perspective. So for the last 2 years, it was really seeing people take over more, and seeing especially I would say externally too, but the face of the company really transitioning to the successors.
Yes.
And
so that means that you've got to kind of let go of your ego there, right? Because we get it's so easy to, I'm the man, and me and Brad, Neil and Brad, we're the man.
100%.
So you got to let go of that ego part in a way, right? You can't be the guy who everyone's sitting around getting the wisdom from, the guru all the time,
Exactly. But again, they're starting to take on the risk and everything else that's associated with that role. And so, yeah, it has been helpful. So I would say that also just enjoy, stay involved a little bit if that's part of your agreement, to just see the fruits of your labor. It's really cool. I really was able to put a bow on this. Neil recently had his going away celebration, and I had mine. And I just remember the last day of my tenure as DesCor's president and CEO was the best day of my career.
And why is that?
It was because at the going away party, and my wife was witness to it, they got it. They saw that I loved them.
Who saw that you loved them?
All our people, and they recited back what I had been teaching them for years. So
that's interesting. So on your last day, it was your best day because you saw that people got what you were trying to communicate to them, and they appreciated you for that.
Well, yes. And the part of it and I just felt like, okay, it was, what a great way to put a bow on this thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. A lot of people, and I look to sports, and I know that you have sports analogies, but I always look to the sports teams that had long-term success, and it started with the 49ers between the 80s and 90s, where the 49ers were willing to get rid of some of the greatest players in history, maybe 2 years before they were done, than 2 years after they were done. That always stuck with me.
Yes, that's interesting. So would you see yourself and Neil as sort of the Joe Montana that got, but instead of being forced out to Kansas City, you graciously stepped aside for the Steve Young to step into the role?
Absolutely. And the other thing is, it's just the goodwill. Again, when I was saying the last day and they got it and they appreciated me, it was, who noticed it? It was my wife who recognized it. An outsider recognized it. I didn't even have to tell her that. She just said, you didn't have to say a word. And my parting shot to the group was, if I have made an impact in your life, I had the leader stand up and I said, if I've made an impact in your life, you can do me one favor. You can give them the benefit of the doubt.
Give who the benefit of the doubt?
The new leaders, because obviously there would be a tendency for comparison.
Yes.
That they're not doing it like Brad and Neil, that type of thing. And
Yeah.
I said, please, I've been with them. You've been with them. You know them. They've got your back.
That's interesting. It's so important for that endorsement to happen, right?
Oh, yeah. And the other thing is as important is after I left, I was nowhere to be found for 3 weeks. Okay. Because we didn't want to create this image that was just lip service. And here I was on a Thursday afternoon. I took a long weekend and I come in Monday morning like nothing has changed.
Yeah.
I wanted to give the group the feeling that there was real transition.
Yes, that's so vital right there. That's so vital. So you didn't come in, you said again, for 3 months, you said?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. And then after that, you're still in an advisory role. How did you manage that?
And then what I would do is I would come in. There's a lot of stuff I can do, either over the phone or electronically with them. But I came in and it was great. It's very fun to come in because it's like a reunion.
Yeah.
But they know who's in charge.
And so how do you handle that? Because I could envisage a situation where Brad comes in, someone who you have a relationship with comes to you and says, I got an issue. Your temptation there is to solve the issue or to give advice when you know that their line of report is to somebody else and you shouldn't really have the conversation.
Oh, that would never happen. I would refer them, or I would personally take them to the person that they needed to talk to. That would be a breakdown of the process and would not happen. I respect the leaders of the company too much to even consider that.
Let me ask you this. What was the biggest mistake you made during this whole process?
The biggest mistake in the transition, or?
You can take your pick. Because, you guys started with the end in mind, right? So
yes.
Sometimes what happens is we put our money on a particular horse and the horse comes up lame. Or we think something's going to go a certain way and circumstances occur like 2008 or something like that disappoint us. We make a bad call based on an emotion or just incorrect judgment. Those kinds of things. What would you do differently if you had to do it all over again, knowing what you know now?
That is a very hard question because I have absolutely no regret. So that's very hard. I don't think there's anything in the transition. It's interesting because Neil and I felt like, and I've been involved in another startup. So I've been involved in 2 startups and we thought, man, we have really created a playbook for starting up companies. But I think that really how Neil and I transitioned out is, I think that's our biggest success. I think the transition of leadership, I called it when I spoke at Neil's retirement party, I said the peaceful transition of leadership.
Right. Right.
I would say there's nothing I would do, and there was no people that I would pick differently to be our successors. I think it's just been I see it as one of my greatest accomplishments and DesCor's greatest accomplishment as well.
What advice would you give to a construction company owner or leader so that they can actually come to the end of their career and say, I have no regrets? How do you manage yourself on a day-to-day basis in order to accomplish that?
Be clear. It comes down to one real question is, what do you want? Be clear with what you want.
Yep.
And have a clear, start with that end in mind. Yep. And visualize what it would look like on your last days, because I can tell you this, it comes a lot faster than you think it does.
Yes, it does.
And again, be clear with your mission, vision, purpose, and hire people that are better than you. And don't be intimidated by that. Set your ego aside, do what's best for the company, and you're just going to have a joyful experience.
Let me ask you one last question, because I think your ability to have passed the company on, I think there's a lot to do with the way that you set up those 5 things that we discussed: the technical skill, thinking like an owner, championing values, operating under pressure. Now, there's this idea of create a customer base. Why is creating a customer base vital when it comes to that transition and that idea of if someone is going to be an owner, they have to be able to do that?
Okay, creating a customer base, because you cannot, when you're creating a company that's going to be transitioned, there has got to be a certain amount of entrepreneurial spirit.
Yes.
And with that entrepreneurial spirit, you cannot rely on the owner to fill the coffers and fill your funnel of opportunities and get you work for a couple reasons. And here's an example. A lot of the people that were both Neil and the relationships that created work for us, a lot of those people are gone. So what we would say is even to the young people, the project engineers, create relationship with people in that organization that have that are kind of like a similar place in their career, because when they rise, you're going to go with them.
Yes.
Right. So what you're doing is you're creating relationships with people that are going to be potential decision makers. And it's important. I mean, if they relied on Brad and Neil to get all their work, DesCor would look nothing like it does now. So,
yep.
And really, this business is pretty easy. It's those people that can get work and execute work are going to succeed.
I think that really puts a bow on our conversation here, because so many people struggle with identifying folks to take over for them and then finding out if they're really the right fit. And if you just took that one framework that you had, those 5 things, they have to have technical skill, they have to think like an owner, they have to create a customer base, champion the values, and operate under pressure. If you just took those 5 things and really were honest about the people that you're thinking about coming into these roles of leadership and ownership and evaluate them on that basis, that would be tremendously helpful to you. I really appreciate you sharing that. That's tremendous, Brad. Okay, we're wrapping up, so I'm going to ask you a critical question now. What's the one restaurant you've discovered since you've been retired that you were like, man, this is an awesome restaurant and I want to recommend it to everyone on the Construction Genius podcast?
There's a very good restaurant. It's hard to get into in Auburn called Josephine's.
Josephine's. And then Auburn's a little town up the hill here in California. So it's interesting that it's hard to get into. Why is it hard to get into?
Because there's the waiting list at the bar starts at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and it's a smaller place, but it's a fantastic restaurant.
That's great. And so there's no reservations, or is that why?
There is reservations, yes.
Okay, so we're going to put a link in the show notes to Josephine's in Auburn. So if you're ever in Northern California, take the trip up to one of our nice little towns and visit that. I really appreciate that, Brad. Well, you've been so generous with your time. We're at an hour here, and so we're going to end it here. I could keep talking to you for ages about this kind of stuff, and thank you so much for coming on the show here today, Brad.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my interview with Brad here today. Hope you enjoyed it. Go out to wherever you get your podcasts and give the show a rating and a review. Feel free to share the podcast with other people who you think would benefit from listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.